Hi, welcome again to the Marshals Museum here in Fort Smith, Arkansas. It's been a great week since last week's talk about the Oklahoma Territory and the court over in Guthrie. This week we're going to be going even farther west. We're going to be talking about Billy the Kid and his Marshals involvements. A number of ways back and forth between him and the people who are running the marshals there, as well as deputies. And we're going to talk more ins and outs of that. Before I get into it, though, I'm going to do our usual and talk about how you can help us here at the museum. We do have our Buy a Brick campaign where you can get a brick personalized. It'll be placed in the sidewalk outside on our property. You can also go to our GoFundMe and you can put in any amount that you want to in there to help fund the building. Well, the building is already taken care of, but we're looking towards the museum experience, all the stuff that's going to be going inside. We know what the plans are. We know what the designs are. You can go to our webpage and take a look and see what that's going to look like. But we're still trying to get our fundraising up towards the point in which we'll be able to have all of that stuff done. And so we can have all of you guys come in and visit us in person. So beyond that, I also want to mention that a week and a half from now, we are going to have our third and final episode of our Talks on Tap lecture series, Facing Ourselves, Discussions on Civil Discourse. I think we can all agree and appreciate the importance of civil discourse in our society right now, and the museum is doing what we can to help with that. Our previous two lectures are both on our YouTube channel, and this third one is going to be broadcast on YouTube on July 6th, and it's going to be at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. So you can adjust accordingly from where you're at, but you can go onto YouTube to the link that Casey is going to be dropping here, and you can click on that, and it'll set up a reminder for you. But we're going to be talking more about that over the next week and a half. But July 6th, that's going to be Ted Celeste. He is a former state representative in Pennsylvania, and he is the founder of the Next Generation Program, National Institute of Civil Discourse, talking civility matters in this time of pandemic and protest. And so we feel that's a really important topic, and we're really happy to be able to present that to you and to present that to everybody else out on the internet. So we're going to be getting to that. You're going to be hearing more as we get towards that in a week and a half. But right now, I want to introduce a special guest and a special friend of mine, David Turk. Dave Turk, I know him because he is the Marshals Service Historian. He works at their headquarters. Of course, so right now he's working from home because of the current situation we're all dealing with. But Dave Turk is the official information source on all things history related regarding the Marshals Service, and he's one of those folks that we rely on heavily here, not just to make sure that we're doing the right stuff, but if there's a question about how things can be presented historically, Dave's the person to talk to. And Dave, welcome to the broadcast. And I understand that you have a little bit of a disclaimer that you first want to pop in about this talk today.
Yes, thanks, Dave. Even though for introduction purposes, you have that right, but this is going to be my personal research on Billy the Kid, my personal work. Even though some of that work does cross into official capacity, it's been done on personal time. So I just wanted to make that very clear for ethical sake, a separation.
Okay, great. But again, though, I'm glad that you're here, and I'm glad that we were able to get this fit into both your work schedule and your personal schedule. And you and I have had many discussions about you and your history and your work with researching Billy the Kid. And I know that a lot of people are really excited about the subject and the character of Billy the Kid. And a lot of people know a little bit about the history of him and the Lincoln County War, especially in no small part due to dramatic films ranging, just a wide variety of them. But I know it's like for me growing up, it was Young Guns. And I know that, yeah, and that's the appropriate response to that. But can you give everybody who's here a little bit of the basics of the Lincoln County War?
Sure. The Lincoln County War was only a part of the conflict which Billy the Kid was in. A lot of what you hear about him isn't true. It's kind of an exaggeration in some ways, and some of it is just simply partially true. But the Lincoln County War itself actually was a conflict from 1878 through about the middle of 1879, in which there was a series of back and forth tete-a-tetes between the landowners, the landed gentry, so to speak. They were pretty much known in Santa Fe, and they had their adherents in Lincoln County. They ran stores out there. They ran the land. They pretty much controlled everything. And it was called the Ring, the Santa Fe Ring. And they had their adherents in Lincoln County were two gentlemen, primarily the main person being James Dolan, who pretty much controlled most of what was going on at that time. However, there was a kind of a break going on then. There was newcomers coming in, and they, in efforts to try to control them. These were smaller landowners, outside interests, primarily John Chisholm, who was not a small concern. He was a rather large one. But there were others that he had allied with, and they came into conflict. Obviously, it was a power struggle, and both sides used whatever they had. And I want to note that it was the Lincoln County War that started the Posse Comitatus Act in July of 1878. It was due to Billy the Kid and his cohorts in one of these back and forths. They had to go to Fort Stanton in order to get military troops, and they did it repeatedly, too much. So much, in fact, that in the last one, they burned down about half the town of Lincoln as a result. Yeah. And President Rutherford B. Hayes said, okay, we can't have this. So there you have the Posse Comitatus Act. So it started with us.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I know that the Posse Comitatus Act was also tied to a certain point to Reconstruction as well, and just as I know, a lot of military were used to help support that. So in the Lincoln County War, you've got the different factions coming back and forth against each other. And could you talk a little bit about the character of Billy the Kid and how he became involved in the Lincoln County War?
Well, Billy the Kid was not known as Billy the Kid, at least the Kid, until much after most of the conflict. This came kind of in addition as he became popularized in the press. He was a young man when he came to New Mexico. There's still a lot of mystery, and there are people who are fascinated by the Billy the Kid story that look into his roots, where he was born, what his surname was. Some say it's McCarty, and I tend to think that maybe more that than Bonnie. Which is another one he is known for, but there's also Bonnie. And then Antrim was his stepfather's name. So that one was kind of thrown in there too. So the mystery of his origins are, pretty interesting themselves. His mother died when he was very young, and he was largely on his own. As a young man, he got himself into trouble. He was living in Silver City, New Mexico, which is in Grant County in the southwestern portion territory at that time. And he found himself an early jailbird just out of a lesson. I think he was about 14 when that happened. There's whole books written about the youth of Billy the Kid. But he escaped, went out to Arizona and met up with some of his later regulators. Charlie Bowdry, Doc Scurlock, Josiah Scurlock, and a number of others, and did some mining and got himself in trouble in the mines.
Yeah, sounds like he had a good history of that. And then, and I know that a lot of those guys, like they were all like teens and 20s, and ended up moving to in one point or another to Lincoln County. and all ending up working for an Englishman in his young 30s. And even though quite often the character is portrayed in movies as being in his 50s and 60s, but
not so much.
Yeah,
you're talking about John Henry Tunstall.
Yes, and so ending up working for Tunstall, who either is killed while being arrested or killed as an assassination, one way or another, depending on the side you're looking at. And so, talking if you can just a little bit about Billy working for Tunstall and knowing Tunstall.
Well, he came to Lincoln County eventually, working for various cow outfits. Trouble was following him wherever he went, but he eventually found some stability on the Tunstall Ranch. The Tunstall Ranch was one of those newcomers that I was telling you about. They were well up against the house and involved in those conflicts. But he formed a fast friendship with Tunstall, and partially because he felt like he was a lawman kind of at that time, because there was a lawman who was working with them, a gentleman named Robert Weidenman. He was actually a deputy U.S. Marshal who was commissioned from Santa Fe. Am I going off?
No. I mean, yeah, we're just. It's great. This way, like I hadn't realized that he'd come into contact with deputies that early on.
Oh, yes.
So he's working with Tunstall. Tunstall gets killed. Can you describe the reaction to that?
Well, the back and forth finally heated up to the point where Tunstall was killed. And in the way he was killed, there was something called the Frank Angel Report. He was an independent justice agent who was sent out to find out what happened to Tunstall, because it was an international incident. Tunstall was a British citizen. Right. And there was a great demand, a great push to find out what happened. He had been isolated and then surrounded. They claimed that he had stolen some horses. He actually was just moving them from one place to another, and halfway in the middle of his journey, they surrounded him and killed him. So they isolated him out there, and he was pretty much, Billy the Kid was actually not very far away when it happened. He and Weidenman were together at that time, riding together, and they pretty much saw the whole thing happen from a distance. And Billy the Kid was very, very unhappy. He swore revenge, and that kind of gave him the impetus to move into the next phase of the war, to go after some of the people who he felt were responsible for killing Mr. Tunstall. Okay, and
in that next phase, could you clarify? I know that there's some people that say, like, you mentioning Whiteman was a deputy. There's reports on both sides saying that Billy was or was not a deputy marshal during the early parts of that phase, like just like going out to arrest the men who had killed Tunstall. Could you clear up any of that?
Sure. Actually, I did this research back in the day, probably about 2003, 2002. Billy the Kid was a special deputy U.S. Marshal in March of 1878 for a period of approximately 4 days. And people mistakenly think it was a sheriff's posse. Now, they were looking for one of the people that I was just telling you about that were responsible for the death of Tunstall. And Jesse Evans was his name, and he was hiding in Lincoln. And so they were going house to house looking for him in a posse. Little did they know that Weidenman had used his powers as deputy U.S. Marshal to deputize both soldiers in that group, because the Posse Comitatus Act had not yet taken place, and Billy the Kid and Fred Waite, who were two of the regulators. And Billy the Kid was one of them. And the reason I know that, even though they don't mention it by name, it is distinctly confirmed in a letter by the U.S. Marshal. And it was just, I just think people just overlooked it. I mean, and if you put 1 + 1 together, you got, it shows you clearly that Billy the Kid was indeed a special deputy U.S. Marshal. That's a very term term time.
Right, right. And so, I mean, but knowing that he was doing that for all of about 4 days until he started to go take steps a little bit too far, that right there is going to be something, because like I've seen people get into internet wars over this whole subject. And I know that from conversations with you, separate from this, that you've seen similar behavior regarding the history of Billy the Kid and people's beliefs. We had a question from one of the viewers regarding what the Posse Comitatus Act. Very quickly, the Posse Comitatus Act is a law that prevents the American law enforcement from utilizing the resources of the American military in uniform. There are very specific exceptions to that law that allow the military to be used in some form of law enforcement capacity, such as what there was exceptions to that used when President Eisenhower put the 101st Airborne into Little Rock to force the integration of Central High School. That's a perfect example of how that happens. But it is very rare that anybody has gone past that. And that law came into effect in the latter part of the 1870s, early 1880s, as a result of things like what Dave was talking about with the Lincoln County War or the effects of using the military during Reconstruction. Dave, do you have anything else to add on the Posse Comitatus Act?
Well, another big use of it was when we were during the Civil Rights era, during the Ole Miss riots. The 101st Airborne was sent to kind of relieve us. It was more or less a rescue mission because we had been staying there all night and we were holding out, to keep Mr. James Meredith safe and guard the registration building known as the Lyceum.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's a great example of how that law has been used. I know there's a number of places online where people can go and learn more about the Posse Comitatus Act, but that's, I think, about the best high-level description of it. And so we've talked about Weidman, we've talked about Billy's 4 days as a deputy, but Billy came into contact later on with deputies at other points. The two incidents that specifically come to mind are involved the assassinations of William Brady and George Heinemann, and then we'll talk in a minute about James Bell and Bob Ollinger.
Right. Those were specific. There were deputies on both sides of the Lincoln County War, and that was probably the marshal's biggest mistake. The marshal at that time was a gentleman named John E. Sherman. He was the nephew of General William Tecumseh Sherman.
Oh, wow.
And he was unfamiliar with the territory, and he really didn't want to go to Lincoln County. So what he did was he stayed in Santa Fe, and he had a tradition that some sheriffs could be cross-deputized. And in the case of Lincoln County, that was a definite. He would deputize simultaneous sheriffs, and that started with William Brady. And William Brady was clearly on the side of the Santa Fe ring. Okay. Weidman was clearly on the other side. So you have a real mess on your hands because of that. And he was able, Brady was able to get special deputies, and Heinemann was one of those. That particular moment that you're referring to is, I believe it was April 1st, 1878.
Yes.
At which they were hiding behind a wall in Lincoln, Billy the Kid and several of his people, while they were going to the sheriff and Heinemann were going to the courthouse, and they were ambushed, I believe, on the way back. So they were killed, and that set off all kinds of alarm bells.
Yeah, and I know that after that, the kid ended up getting like a series over the next few years of being like combinations, like being chased, getting into jail, getting out of jail, getting chased again. I know at different points, different members of the crew left the territory. Some came to Indian Territory, others went to Arizona and elsewhere. And then 1881, again in April, you get a situation with Billy the Kid back in jail again. And if you could talk a little bit about what happened that particular day involving Bell and Ollinger.
Right. What I kind of I have to go back a little bit because there were two different portions. The Lincoln County War ended when Billy the Kid was kind of withdrew from the territory. He went first to the Panhandle in Texas. Some of his friends kind of siphoned off some of the regulators. I think the one you might be referring to, Fred Waite, who was the other special deputy, went back to the Indian Territory, Paul's Valley area. And for the most part, he stayed there for a good year and a half. This was after he met, or supposedly met, with the governor, Lew Wallace. And I believe he met with him, and he assumed he was going to get a pardon, which he never got. And I think that was a bone of contention with Billy. Yeah. But he eventually came back in 1880, and he found more friends, and these were definitely involved in more criminal activity, counterfeiting, and so forth. And that drew the attention of the Secret Service. And there was an agent named Azariah Wild who came from New Orleans, who started poking into this counterfeiting activity. And guess who was connected with it? Billy the Kid was connected, kind of. He wasn't making funny money, but he was passing it. And he was definitely involved in some robbery and other kind of schemes. This got the attention of the marshals as well. They knew they would have to round up Billy, and there was an all-out chase for him. They finally captured him in December of 1880, a place called Stinking Springs, and they were holed up in a house there. And that's there were about four of them that were in the house. One of them was killed, Charlie Bowdry, and he ended up going to jail. He was taken to Las Vegas, New Mexico territory, yep. and then to Santa Fe, then finally to Mesilla, where he was tried, and he was to be hung. And Bob Ollinger and J.W. Bell were the two that were to guard him. Ollinger was a full deputy U.S. Marshal. He had been assigned that job by his chief, Tony Nyes. And he was to take Billy, and Billy and him didn't like each other anyway. They had run into each other prior. J.W. Bell, though, was another case. I think he was kind of a likable fellow. He was a special deputy, or kind of a guard. He was pretty much in this as a term capacity job. And Billy did get along with him. And that's how he managed to escape from the courthouse while waiting for execution. Ollinger went over to eat, and Bell got the task of guarding him, and it turned out to be a big mess. I guess he got within range of where Billy could get to him. The escape has been well chronicled, but he killed Bell, and he got the rifle, got into a window and waited for Ollinger to come out of the Wortley Hotel where he had been eating, mm-hmm. and said, "Hello, Bob." And he looked up, and that was the end. Okay. For Ollinger.
And then,
sorry, a long explanation there.
No, I understand. There's no short stories where a lot of this is concerned.
No.
So after the killings of Bell and Ollinger, which earlier, like the Brady and Hindman deaths, it was pretty much Billy and the gang. In this case, it was very definitely just Billy. With that, can you give us a rundown of, because really it was only 2 more months and Billy finally met his end?
It was actually a little more than that. His death was in July. Yeah. He had escaped at the end of April of 1881. By that time, Pat Garrett had been elected sheriff, and he was a special deputy U.S. Marshal as well. And during some of the chase to Stinking Springs, he wasn't, but he was in charge, and he pursued his leads. He knew Billy very well. As they were fellow cattlemen at one time, and had been friends at one time as well. So he pursued him into Fort Sumner, which is where Billy was chronicled to be hanging out with his old friend Pete Maxwell, and a number of, because they believe there was a romance between him and a sister.
Okay.
And that's where the surprise came in Maxwell's darkened bedroom when he thought he heard something. And Q&S was
yeah.
I probably butchered
like,
that.
Who is it? Yeah.
Q&S, yeah. So he asked, "Who is it?" And that's when Garrett shot him in the darkened room.
Okay, and then now here's the lights going off at my place because our energy saving system. Hold on a second. There we go. So for anybody else that's out there, Dave didn't even get a chance to see that because of how our system's set up. So with the death of Billy, or the shooting of Billy, you end up with all of the different various stories of his demise and what ended up happening. And I know there's a lot of conspiracies. I know I agree with you that, yeah, he's very definitely dead and buried in New Mexico. I know that we deal with folks still who believe that Brushy Bill is a guy. It was really Billy, even though Brushy Bill's story has been pretty well shown to not be true. But beyond that, the biggest news... You
might have some people in Hyco, Texas who might disagree with you.
Yeah, I understand that, but we're in Fort Smith. And but we have one of the biggest news over the last couple of years regarding Billy has to do with a special photograph. Well, I should say tintype that showed up. And for anybody who is watching right now, if you're familiar with Billy the Kid and his history and the last couple of years worth of news on him, you know of the famous croquet tintype that went up for auction. I know that, I know the people who are involved in the auction. I know at least the name of the person. I don't know personally the person who purchased it, but I don't think it went to. There was some talk it was going to go to auction, and it was withdrawn. If it didn't go to auction, I think it at least went as a private sale to. I thought wasn't it Bill Koch ended up owning it also? I can't.
Oh, no. You're talking. Are you talking about
the original? I know the original picture of Billy ended up going to Bill Koch. I thought he ended up getting this one as well, but maybe not. If somebody knows specifically about what happened, like whether it went for private sale or up for auction, if you want to throw it in the comments. But what are your personal opinions on the croquet tintype?
Well, I was watching the National Geographic special on it. When some of the people who were involved in these various aspects of the Billy the Kid story, particularly Steve Cedarwall, I've known him for years. He's done a very diligent job in studying various aspects of it. Some things were more of a like mind, and some things, I tend to be more traditional. And one, I think one of the things we agreed on was the croquet tintype. After I saw it, I started tracing it back, and I realized that it had belonged to Charlie Bowdry. It was an actual real deal. And there isn't many real deals. I know there's a lot of folks who claim that there are real deals out there, but you have to understand that this man lived for approximately 23 years. There had to be more than one image of him. Now, there was one that was confirmed, and it's the Upham photograph, I believe.
Right, with him standing with the rifle and the pistol.
Right, the tintype that Bill Koch currently owns.
And
that's
quite commonly printed backwards.
Right, but I heard it was taken in a jokey manner.
Yeah.
And this also kind of catches Billy the Kid in a composure moment. So I did a road map on this particular one on my own time. I kind of do this for fun. But I actually traced the path that this picture took.
Okay.
And I was fascinated that there might be a second one. Indeed, this, I believe, came from the family of Charlie Bowdry's brother.
Oh, okay.
And I met some of the family who are, by the way, in Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
There's a place called Plumerville,
Yep.
which is not too very far from Little Rock. That actually has a Bowdry Street. If you go there, they had a mercantile there. This brother ran that mercantile one time.
Okay.
And his family knew about Charlie Bowdry, but of course they didn't want to talk about it.
Right.
He was bad seeder and so forth. But I heard this brother was almost in New Mexico. They almost sent him out there. They came very, very close. And I wrote about this particular item. But that photo, that tintype, the croquet tintype, croquet was invented then. There were advertisements in the Las Vegas, New Mexico papers for croquet. It's a very English thing, and they were enjoying those kind of entertainments even.
Okay.
But what happened was the tintype ended up going with a relative out to California, where it was put in a storage locker. And then the gentleman died very suddenly and very tragically young. He did not leave any kind of instructions. Eventually, there was a sale of that locker.
Yeah.
And the items that were in this box, this cigar box, included the croquet image. And this one gentleman from California was lucky enough to recognize some of the
What that
faces.
was.
And said, well, this could be it.
Okay. And then we got a message. Mike Sheriff, he's a guy over in Oklahoma City who does some work with Oklahoma Historic Society. He's saying that it was offered at auction but didn't meet the reserve.
I believe that might have been the case. I wasn't sure what happened. I know at one point they were going to put it. I wasn't really following it at that point. I think it was afterwards, and my interest in it was purely historical and from the Charlie Bowdry viewpoint, because at that time I was interviewing members of his family.
Okay.
And so I was able to find out which sibling would have ended up with it. And there was only one sibling that really was that close to it. And
All right.
that was this brother.
Okay. And Dave, before we go, okay, and again, for anybody who's not been watched any of these previously, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to throw a question in. I've got a couple more things I want to just quickly go over with Dave before we wrap up here. But again, if you have a question right now, please feel free to go ahead and throw that down on the doodly-doo and ask your question. I'll have Dave take care of if it's regarding Dave, or I'll take care of it if it's regarding the Marshals Museum or whatever. But you mentioned earlier that in the stuff that you wrote, do you want to talk about your writings, your books that you've published so far?
Well, I mean, as far as Billy the Kid, I mean, I take pride in everything I write. Of course, as historian for the service, I wrote the service modern history, Forging the Star, which is I'm very proud of that. And I had a lot of help doing it, particularly from my boss, who was probably a great editor, Chief Drew Wade, edited probably endlessly on that. But as far as Billy the Kid, I've written 2 books, and I brought them both here just to show, just for identification purposes. The first one I wrote way back in 2006 to 2011. It finally, in 2011, it's called Blackwater Draw, and it's pretty much it's been out there for some years, but it characterized what you were talking about. One of the reasons I laughed was because you were talking about Young Guns.
Yeah.
Young Guns 2 in particular kind of follows this particular incident. There were 3 people that were killed in this canyon called Blackwater Canyon. Blackwater Draw was the name of a horse draw that was a place where the regulators stopped at one point and ended up shooting their two captives, two of which were involved in the death of Tunstall.
Okay.
And the other one was one they suspected was a traitor at that point. But we actually went into Blackwater Canyon and traced it down, and we found cartridges. There literally had been only two owners of that canyon in 100 years. And
Right.
the owner was very kind to let us do that. So part of it was
That's
I don't
cool.
know, CSI sort of thing. The second one is a book that I put out last year called Here Lies Billy the Kid, in which this one was more or less a study of the death of the kid, but follows Bowdry more. And this is
Yes.
this is how I got involved with the croquet.
And you can't see it right now, but I'm holding up my copy of the book to the camera here as well. So it's pretty well thumbed through, and I've got some good notes in there. I've got a question from Patrick Weeks, my boss, and you know Patrick quite well. His question is, best Billy the Kid movie? And I guess I'll expand that to best and most accurate. Those are two different things quite often.
Yes, they are. Actually, that is two distinct, separate characteristics. That's a good one from Patrick. As far as the movie is concerned, there's a lot of documentaries out there that I really liked. Requiem for Billy the Kid was probably one of my favorites on that. But as far as a popular movie like Young Guns and so forth, there really isn't a lot of older ones that you have. Of course, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. There's a lot wrong with it. I mean, it's been Hollywood, It's been Hollywoodized, but the characters were pretty good. I thought they were played well. James Coburn was the Garrett character, and Chris Christopherson was Billy the Kid.
Yeah.
And as far as the best one, I say that was the best one, but I couldn't tell you. I would have a tough time. Saying which one would be my favorite. Probably that one.
It was at one point when I started doing some more research into the subject of Billy the Kid, and I made a comment about this earlier, is I started going through all of the different films, the film versions of this story, and I started to look at the true ages of some of the people involved, whether it was Billy or some of the other regulators. I think the oldest one was Doc Scurlock at the ripe age of like 27, 28 when this all started up. And then I looked at Tunstall, I looked at the other faction and all the different ages. And then I looked at the ages of the actors who are portraying them in all of these films. And while Billy and all of the members of the regulators were being portrayed by people who might have been 5-ish years older than the real people were, I started seeing that like some of the other characters, McSween was often portrayed by somebody 10, 15 years older. Tunstall was usually 20 or 30 or even 40 years older than he really was. I mean, it was really interesting seeing how, well, we can't have this landowner be portraying somebody who's 30. Nobody will believe it. And so let's see. Patrick is also asking best BTK documentary. And I should say Billy the Kid, because BTK is a whole nother thing.
Oh yeah. If you're talking about the serial killer from Kansas,
Billy the Kid. I need to stop saying BTK. So Billy the Kid.
No, there's many, but I really liked Requiem for Billy the Kid the best. It was one of the first ones that came out about 2003, 2004, somewhere around there. I've been in several documentaries on the kid. One time I got the pleasure of playing one of our own marshals.
Oh, nice.
And it was pretty fun. Of course, I had to wear a bowler hat. I'm not wearing a cowboy hat. I know some of my colleagues wanted me to, but I figured it probably wouldn't look good in the camera angle.
Well, and quite often, I mean, it's just one of those things that as much as people think marshals wore cowboy hats, I would expect most of the deputies wore cowboy hats. Most of the marshals would wear bowlers or other types of more gentlemanly hats, because again, the deputies were the ones going out and getting dirty and doing the work in most cases. And especially in the frontier, if you were appointed as a marshal, typically you were more society and you had more, I don't know, political clout. You had more, I don't know, there's a different level of society that I think that in my mind of most of the folks. Granted, I'm sure there were exceptions, but I would definitely think that there were issues there with the types of people who are doing the different jobs.
I think you're right. Definitely, it's a sign of status to have a bowler hat. Sign of big wealth.
Okay. And I'm sitting here. We've been on here for nearly 3/4 of an hour. This has gone. We've had a lot of fun talking about a lot of different stuff. We've had some good questions. I know that we've had a ton of people watching today, and I know that you were thinking that a number of folks from the Marshal Service might be watching today just to give you a hard time later. I did have Tracy Winchell actually called you out. Turk, my people. And there's some other folks that I'm assuming are just from around the country. And we've got folks from California, folks from Ohio, Western Tennessee, McAllen, Texas. I know Oklahoma City with one of them. But yeah, we've got we've had a lot of good folks coming in today. We've had a lot of good questions. Very definitely a lot of good conversation. And again, quickly before we end today, Baltimore, Maryland. Before we end today, I want to again mention that the Marshals Museum, if you want to continue to support programs like this, if you want to help us get to the point where we have all of our exhibits in the building, all of our museum experience created, it's already designed. You can go to our webpage and take a look to see what kind of designs are on the table that we are looking to have, so we can help tell stories like this and other stories from the 230 years plus of the Marshals Service, all the way from 1789 to now and into the future. If you want to help with that, we have our Buy a Brick campaign, so you can get to that. We also have a GoFundMe, or if you just feel like if you feel like helping us without going either of those directions, by all means, feel free to contact us, and we're more than happy to help you help us. Waukesha, Wisconsin. Lisa Frost from over at the historic site. A woman said she was a little girl in Oxford, Mississippi during the James Meredith event. So she got to be there for that. So with pushing like on that side, obviously for the Marshals Museum, just to help make sure that we're able to tell these stories in person and have people come here and visit us. We cannot wait until our doors are open to the public so we can share some of this with you firsthand, so you don't have to just look at us over the internet, because I know that you'd rather look at us in person. We'd rather have you look at us in person. Dave, thank you again very much for coming in and taking time out of your day to talk to us. I know you hate talking about Billy the Kid.
I could probably go on for another 3 hours.
We probably could too, and I know that there's a few folks who are watching this live who are more than happy to, who'd be more than happy to have us just keep talking like this. I know we've had a few of the presentations on it, so we'll have to have you again on sometime. Maybe they're talking like a Billy the Kid Part 2, or maybe some other topic.
Sure.
So then we've got a person whose hometown is Fort Smith, and she does some research on black deputies who rode for Judge Parker. Yes, not just Bass Reeves. There's a ton of people out there, huge untapped resources, and that's one of those things that I cannot wait until either I or someone else gets the time to be able to dig into all of that, so we can help tell those stories.
Half a day on that.
Oh, just on that we could take easily half a day or more. So with that, Dave, again, very much thank you for taking time out of your day to brave the internet and talk to us about Billy the Kid. Thank you to everybody who took the time to watch this afternoon. Make sure to continue to be safe, take care of yourself, take care of your families, and have a happy and safe weekend. And if you've got any questions about any of the stuff we were talking about today, either go ahead and pop in and comment on this thread. We'll usually get the messages, or message us directly through our museum webpage or through the museum Facebook page. If you have a question strictly for Dave Turk regarding Marshals history, we can also drop a link to the Marshals Service History section, and you can get to Dave through that. So otherwise, if anybody has any questions, like I said, holler at us online. Thank you for stopping by today. Again, one more time, thanks to Dave. And you guys have yourselves a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Dave.